Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Thursday, the 1st of August here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, the Federal Reserve's Jerome Powell says a rate reduction could come as soon as September as the BOE gears up for a possible cut at today's meeting.
The Prime Minister will meet with police leaders as more than 100 people are arrested during protests in London.
Plus, Donald Trump questions Kamala Harris's racial identity at a roundtable with black journalists, as polling suggests the race is now a dead heat.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has signalled the US Central Bank is on course to cut interest rates next month unless progress on cooling inflation stalls. Speaking after the FOMC again held its key rate unchanged at a two-decade high of 5.25% to 5.5%, Powell offered his clearest hint about a rate cut.
The question will be whether the totality of the data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks are consistent with rising confidence on inflation and maintaining a solid labor market. If that test is met, a reduction in our policy rate could be on the table as soon as the next meeting in September.
Markets took the news in their stride, with treasuries rallying after Powell's press conference. Interest rate swaps showed traders have fully priced in a quarter-point cut in September and a total of almost 70 basis points worth of reductions for the year.
Now to the Bank of England, where it's a close call, but there could be the first rate cut since the start of the pandemic today. Investors last night placed a 57% chance on a quarter-point cut, taking the key lending rate from 5.25% to 5%. Borrowing costs have been at a 16-year high for almost a year. Inflationary pressures in the UK are receding, and the bank has signalled since February that it is weighing when to cut. The decision will be announced at 12 noon, with Governor Andrew Bailey's press conference at 12:30pm London time, and we will have live coverage here on Bloomberg Radio.
Now to some earnings results out this morning. Societe Generale, the French bank, reporting net income of €1.11 billion for the second quarter that beat the average analyst's estimate. Another French bank, Crédit Agricole, also beating estimates with its second quarter results with net income of €1.83 billion. ING, the Dutch lender, also beating on net income in the second quarter and increasing its total income outlook for 2024 to over €22 billion.
Now, the US is considering placing unilateral restrictions on China's access to AI memory chips and equipment capable of making semiconductors. The move may come as soon as next month and would further escalate tech rivalry between the world's biggest economies. According to people familiar with the matter, the new rules are designed to stop leading chip makers SK Hynix and Samsung from supplying high bandwidth memory chips to Chinese firms. President Biden's administration is working on several restrictions aimed at keeping vital technology from Chinese manufacturers, but Bloomberg understands that no final decision has been made.
Meta reported better than expected sales for the second quarter, suggesting that the company's AI investments could be paying off. Shares of the social media company rose in late trading yesterday. CEO Mark Zuckerberg says he believes artificial intelligence will be transformative.
There are all the jokes about how all the tech CEOs get on these earnings calls and just talk about AI the whole time. It's because it's actually super exciting and it's going to change all these different things over multiple time horizons.
That's Meta's Mark Zuckerberg. According to Bloomberg data, the Facebook and Instagram parent company reported sales of just over $39 billion for the second quarter, compared with analysts' estimates of $38.3 billion. Meta had 3.27 billion users across all of its apps as of the end of June. That's an increase of 7% from last year.
In the UK, Prime Minister Keir Starmer will meet senior police leaders to give them his full backing after several violent protests. More than 100 people were arrested in central London last night in a demonstration organised by far-right groups. It follows unrest in Southport in the wake of a stabbing attack that killed 3 girls, where a crowd of several hundred people hurled bricks and bottles at riot police near a mosque.
British police, meanwhile, say they've charged a 17-year-old with the murders of 3 girls who were stabbed to death in that attack in Southport. The children were attacked during a Taylor Swift-themed holiday workshop on Monday morning. Merseyside Chief Constable Serena Kennedy explains the other charges the teenager faces.
10 counts of attempted murder and possession of a bladed article following the tragic incident in Southport. The 17-year-old cannot be named for legal reasons as he is under 18.
Merseyside Chief Constable Serena Kennedy speaking there. 5 children remain in critical condition along with 2 adults who tried to help them. The 17-year-old will appear in court later today.
Now to the US. Republican nominee Donald Trump has questioned rival Kamala Harris's black identity during a combative roundtable event with black journalists. The former president responded to a question about comments from his party casting Harris as a, quote, diversity hire.
She was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She is always identified as a black woman.
I respect either one.
Donald Trump speaking at the National Association of Black Journalists convention in Chicago. His comments drew boos and gasps from the audience. In response, the Vice President condemned his comments as, quote, divisiveness and disrespect. Meanwhile, Bloomberg understands Kamala Harris's representatives met with potential Vice President pick, that is Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, yesterday as part of a, quote, selection process. That is as some Labour groups express worries about Arizona leader Mark Kelly joining the Democratic ticket. Now, lots to discuss this morning. Let's get more on the Federal Reserve decision now. The signals from Jerome Powell that officials are on course to cut rates at their next meeting in September. Garfield Reynolds leads Bloomberg's Markets Live team in Asia, and he joins us this morning. Garfield, hi, thanks for your time. So is the September cut a certainty now, do you think?
Well, depends on who you ask. From the point of what the Federal Reserve statement said and what Jay Powell said, it's possible, but they still need to see more data to back that up, especially we do get 2 CPI reports, 2 payrolls reports between now and that September decision. If you look at the markets, they've fully priced in a September cut. They were already fully pricing one in before the FOMC. So they've taken this as confirmation that, whatever the Fed says, they're going to cut because inflation has slowed significantly and because the jobs market is showing signs of weakness, which the Fed, to be fair, is acknowledging. And so that balance of risks has markets betting that the Fed's going to cut in September and then most likely cut in November and cut in December.
OK, so that's what we heard from Jerome Powell and the Fed. Of course, the market reaction fairly muted, though we are seeing some interesting currency moves today in Asia. Further strengthening of the yen after yesterday's Bank of Japan decision. It's just under the 150 handle against the dollar now. Some traders are thinking that maybe 140 could be in sight against the dollar.
Well, we do love our round numbers, but it does make sense when you think about it that the yen topped out around 160, which was also aligned with some very, very major, it was like a long time since it had been that weak. So now it's come barreling through 150. A move back down towards 140 would start to bring it back into line with, what some people are saying are the long-term fundamentals, especially in an environment where you do have expectations that the Fed will cut several times and BOJ Governor Ueda made it clear that the Bank of Japan is likely to raise rates several times. So you're going to get a narrowing of what is still a very wide divergence between US rates and Japanese rates. That should fuel yen gains. And the feeling is that the momentum would start to wane for yen strength when you get down to round about 140 or 135 or so. That's the sort of level that people think would make sense, which, based on recent history, would still be quite weak. It's just there's a lot of concern that the yen is still too weak considering those fundamentals and some other fundamentals.
OK, so that on the yen, huge moves and obviously big reaction also in Japanese stocks this morning. I mean, our third major point, though, of course, is another central bank decision from the Bank of England. Markets leaning towards a cut, but it's probably expected to be, divided vote in terms of the MPC. What do you think is the likelihood that we get 25 basis points today?
Well, in many ways, it's extremely hard to tell, precisely because we haven't really heard, certainly from the Bank of England, the head of the Bank of England, since before the election was called, because he didn't want to go, having any influence on the political scene. So that makes it particularly hard to tell. There are arguments on both sides leaning towards, you would think, a cut, especially after the Fed delivered ultimately, a dovish outlook. So a cut would seem likely. In a lot of ways, what's going to matter most for markets is whether they cut or not, what they're indicating about how rapidly or slowly they might move going forward. The pound has been one of the best performing currencies this year, and there are a lot of speculators betting on further gains. So there's perhaps some vulnerability for a reversal if the BOE isn't is a little bit too dovish, because the thing is, that pound move, those pound bets have been driven by the perception that yes, the UK is going to see lower rates, but they're not going to come down as fast as the Fed. So if they do anything that indicates they might come down as fast as the Fed, that could cause some volatility, given the way that there are a lot of pound bulls out there.
OK, Garfield, thanks very much for bringing us up to date. That's Garfield Reynolds there, who leads Bloomberg's Markets Live team in Asia.
Now to the UK story. Prime Minister Keir Starmer will meet with senior police leaders to give them his full backing today. The move comes after several violent protests, with more than 100 people arrested in central London last night. Joining us now is our reporter James Woolcock. Good morning, James. Flares were thrown at the gates of Downing Street in this demonstration. It's highly unusual, really, isn't it? Or you're going to put it into context for us in terms of protests. What actually happened last night in London?
Well, as you said, Caroline, the Met have told us that more than 100 were arrested for offences including violent disorder, assault on an emergency worker and breach of protest conditions. There was a rally that was agreed to be going on outside Downing Street between the hours about 7 and 9 last night, but it dragged on far later into the evening. And in sort of UK law, if you break protesting rules, that then puts you up for a public order offence. So the arrest started beginning. Some officers minor injuries, the Met has said. It is hard to compare sizes, given this rally just happened last night. A lot of information is still coming in. But just to put this in perspective, we've had pro-Palestine protests all this year and last year since October. And there you will see numbers like the Met saying there were roughly 30,000 people in a protest last November, 29 arrests, 70,000 just after October, 9 arrests. Last night you have the Met saying roughly a few hundred people with more than 100 arrests. And compare that to one of the worst riots in modern UK history, the 2011 London riots. So over a period of 5 days, as opposed to just one night, there was a difference in times there. More than 3,000 arrests and 5 deaths at its worst in 2011. So the disorder as yet is not on the kind of scale of like record-breaking scales. But however, it is quite a sudden and shocking occurrence that almost suddenly we see violence outside of Downing Street. You've also seen disorder overnight in Hartlepool and some in Manchester as well.
Yeah, and quite small numbers involved in those cases as well. What sparked this protest, James?
It's hard to point to one easy cause, especially for large social movements like this. However, a lot of the organisation for this began in Southport, where there was a vicious stabbing attack that led to the deaths of 3 girls. Now, the police and media follow strict rules about what we can report. There is now an active court case ongoing, so we have to maintain the right to a fair trial, and we are limited in what we can say now that a 17-year-old has been charged in Southport. But in the gap of that information, sort of in what we can say, in this social media era, that gap has been filled by a lot of far-right groups and conspiracy theorists. They have filled that gap with a lot of misinformation about who this 17-year-old is, where they have come from, the motivations behind the attack, all of which is complete speculation. And the police have taken the unusual step of revealing that there are some invented names on social media. They are incorrect, the police say, and that the charge team was born in Britain. So some of the false rumours about their origin are also incorrect. However, that hasn't stopped far-right groups organising and putting out leaflets and organising rallies to say that immigration is out of control, and that has led to some of the events of last night.
And so just in terms of what we're expecting today from the government, from the Prime Minister, what comes next and the response?
Well, I mean, Keir Starmer meets senior police leaders this afternoon. He's expected to say that they have his full backing to use the full powers of the law to stop mindless violence. And so he will potentially be speaking after that as well. And I take note that the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, earlier this week said that social media giants need to take some responsibility for how this information was spread.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.